So great to see you again. It's Judy from Coffee, Cookies, and Books. And what we're going to do today is the new series that I introduced, Deep Dive, Episode 1. Honestly, I think you'll enjoy it. And with that in mind, I'll see you on the other side. So, we're going to give this a go. This is my first try at this, and hopefully I'll get better as we go along. But as I announced in the introduction video, which I will link below, I am starting a series called Deep Dive Reads. And what we're going to do in these series is going to take two books of a similar nature, and we're basically going to work our way through the chapters and analyze what's happening in them. Now, it just so happens that the two books that we're going to do today have actually very interesting subjects that are tackled within these books. So the first one is We Used to Live Here. This is just the jacket, which I don't want to leave on because it's easier to work with the book without it, but We Used to Live Here by Marcus Cleaver. And the other book is This Book Will Bury Me by Ashley Winstead. So in the first video, I mentioned that what we would be doing today is we would be talking about Chapter 1, Documentation 1 from this book, We Used to Live Here, and This Book Will Bury Me. We're going to do chapters 1 through 4. And we are going to keep them separate. So what we're going to tackle first is we are going to tackle This Book Will Bury Me. Let me take this stuff out because it's just distracting and I pretty much know where we are. So before we get started in the book, I wanted to cover a couple of really important things. So the first thing is there are no triggers written in this book. And I don't think, because I have read both these books, and I don't think as I think about how the book transpired, that there's really anything in the book that's super triggering. Hopefully, you'll feel that way too as you read through if you haven't read it before. The other thing I did want to mention, and that's going to be the case with both these books and all deep dives, is there are complete spoilers. This is not spoiler-free. We are going to be discussing these chapters in depth. So if you don't want to know what happens, then you're okay to still follow along because I am going to give you the next set of chapters at the end of these chapters. Now, if you haven't read these yet, I would suggest you go and you read these chapters, which I will tell you what they are, and then come back to this after you've read. So you want to, if you haven't read it, make sure that you're following on the proper chapters and you don't watch these until you've actually read the chapters, unless you don't care. I'm kind of one of these people that sometimes I don't care. Now, in this particular book, in this one specifically, Used to Live Here, I did go and watch videos after I had read it, and I watched these real long deep dives. So, okay, so let's just get on with it. So before we get started, one of the first things that I think is of interest is this map that is right at the front of the book. Now, I don't know if the map appears in the ebook, but I'm pretty sure it's probably in the paperback. And it is a map that talks about a few different things. So I think it refers to certain things that are in the house, specific to the house that's part of the story of the book. And then there are some things that I think they're in the neighborhoods. Okay. And then there are some things that I think that are appear at a certain point in the book. Now, I don't want to get too specific because this is always something that we can come back to afterwards. But I did want to encourage you to read the map carefully, because certain aspects of the map are going to appear in the book, and we'll come back and reference those things as we get into it. Now, the other thing is throughout the entire book, there is Morse code. And the Morse code starts on the map, okay? And I have gone through and I have translated the Morse code. Morse code, when you throw them all together, because it's only on the documentation, it makes a sentence at the end. Now, you can look that up easily online. I didn't do that. I wanted to go through and I wanted to find out for myself, what does the Morse code mean, and eventually figure out what the sentence is going to be once we go through at the end. So the first word is the word the. I don't know if you can see it. I did write it on there, but I wrote it in pencil, so it's not maybe not that legible. But anyways, that is the first word that is indicated on Morse code. So the first chapter we're going to read is The Outsiders. So in the case of this book, all the chapters have chapter names. So I have gone through and I've numbered them. So I'll give you the chapter names along with what chapter number we're on, because the numbers relate back to what we're reading on here as we're keeping track of things. Okay, now not all chapters are going to have documentation that come right after each one. Some of them don't, and that's fine. But always, if you read a chapter and there's documentation right after it, read it right after it. Okay, now, so how it starts off on the first chapter is they'd rung the doorbell unannounced on a chilly Friday night. So it literally starts right into the fact that Eve, who is our main character and the narrator through the book, has these people show up and ring the doorbell. Now, she gives a base description. So it's a family of 5, middle class, wrapped up in sturdy winter jackets. The parents in their early 40s, Eve guessed. The tall father with broad shoulders and square jaw. The petite mother with cold blue eyes. And I underlined that because I think that that's really important in the idea of when we're working through this and we're thinking about the mother. Keep that in mind. And she has a silver cross necklace that also is going to become important. All in all, they seem the kind of brood that would cap a Sunday morning sermon with brunch at Applebee's. Eve was more than a little familiar with this crowd. So that alludes to some of Eve's upbringing, obviously. She concluded there was no serious threat and she opened the door. So she's already allowed herself and allowed them access to her, which I think is sort of a big mistake. That's just kind of my feeling. Like, I am very caught. I mean, I have a Ring camera and somebody rings the doorbell and I automatically go to the Ring on my phone and I speak to them before I answer any doorbell. Okay. So I think that is perhaps I mean, I live in a downtown area, so I'm very careful about that. But, I think maybe because she felt comfortable, but at the same time, she's out in this isolated house out in the middle of nowhere, and she opens the door. Okay. So then the father proceeds to ask if they can come inside, and it's like she questions, was he expecting her to invite them inside? So obviously that is the case. Now, Eve is waiting for her partner, Charlie, her girlfriend, to come home and at any time. And of course, she's looking forward to it because the two of them are very close. The family goes on to talk, they all they want to come in. He wants to show them the house. that he used to live in and that he grew up in. Now, there is something to note that I think is very important, and that is that the 7-year-old daughter is holding a green pen and a Blue's Clues notebook. Now, that is a thing that is important to note that is going to come up a little bit later. Now, there are, it's one girl and 2 boys. Okay, so 3 kids. Eve does hesitate, and, she hesitates because of the environment that they live in is very isolated. She knows it's very isolated, and her spidey sense sort of comes in to play, like she can't see a vehicle or anything like that. So she asks where the car is, and they're like, oh, it's down the road. So they're saying that they couldn't get it up because it was too icy, up the road because it was too icy. Then she notices a smudge of dirt on his plaid coat. She finds that odd. Now, these are just all sort of little details that they're being thrown at you in the first chapter that you normally would just kind of let it go by, right? And that detail bothers Eve. I don't know if it's because she just is OCD, like she has that tendency a little bit. So maybe that's why. But when he asks, is this okay? She's not sure. Like, it's like, let me check with Charlie. Let me check with my partner. Because, this partner is going to show up and these people are going to be in the house, right? She runs to get her phone. Of course, they ask if they can come. It's cold outside, very cold outside. I can't remember is it sleet, raining, or is it snowing? I think it's snowing. Yeah, I think it's snowing. They ask if they can come and stand inside because it's cold. They're cold. So she lets them in. She lets them in to the kind of foyer area, okay, and asks them to wait. And she goes off to find her phone. Now, the one thing she does mention here is she mentions her favorite toy when she's young. Now, the reason I bring this up is because this favorite toy that she calls Mo is like a voice in the back of her head, and it comes up again later on. So these are all things that I think are important. And one of the statements is, once you let them in, Mo whispered, they'll never leave. So it's like her subconscious telling her that. And so she dials Charlie. And again, this is important, okay? But she dials Charlie and it goes right to Charlie's voicemail. So she cannot get a hold of Charlie. And I think it's extremely important to remember, all the instances with her cell phone, all the instances with Charlie, because everything that does happen, it's all happening to Eve, okay? Charlie is kind of a background character to everything that is happening. So she can't get a hold of Charlie, and she decides to tell them and lie to them. So she basically says, I'm sorry. My girlfriend says that, no, essentially. So, I mean, she does say, she's like, but she's still very apologetic about it. And I think that's Eve is a people pleaser. And so it's typical for her to want to say yes. She's saying we still have a lot to do in the house, which it's true because they have just purchased this house and they have just moved in. Okay. So that's something that's also very important in it. And then he gives her his business card that says a business logo on it, and just saying, we're passing through, and we could come by another time, and tells her there's no need to apologize, all that wonderful thing. And as they're pulling the door to leave, her one statement in her mind is the mother seemed relieved. So it's almost like the mom didn't want to be there. At least that's the impression you kind of get. And I mean, there are some things, but it's the daughter, Jenny, who is making a big deal. She really wants to look at in the house. And I do think that comes into play later as to why Jenny wants to look in the house. But, we have to get there. Haven't got there yet. But that's odd, right? Like, why would a 7-year-old kid care? Most 7-year-old kids would not care at all. She starts to feel guilt for using the Charlie card, as she would call it. And she says, wait, at the last minute, and says 15 minutes, and he nods and says tops. And my note is she never should have said yes. So that's kind of where I've left that off. That's the end of that chapter. And I loved that. I thought that it ends the same way it begins, more or less. It begins with the doorbell going off, and it ends with her letting them in the house. So right away, you're brought into this whole transaction between these people who don't know each other. And, and everything about all of this is very odd, right? And the other thing I guess you could say is that Eve is not very good at setting boundaries. I think that she's always kind of dependent on Charlie to do that. That's kind of just the impression you get as you're kind of reading through this, that Charlie's the one strong, and Charlie is always telling her, say no, but she just can't, and she lets them in. So that's the end of that first chapter. There's actually a lot to unpack in that first chapter, and hopefully we kind of went over all of this. It does follow by documentation A01, and it says property. And the thing that's interesting about this is not so much the description of the property, but the things to note. And I just want to mention them so that you make note of them, and also so I make note. I underlined this. It's the address of the property is 3709 Heritage Lane, transcribed from the no longer operational seeking/home.net. It's believed that Redacted Bank owned the house at the time of posting. So this posting is no longer available. You can't see it. You can't even see the website that it was posted at. So I think that's creepy. And I do think that it's important to note that. So that's why I underlined that in the transcription. And then, of course, if you read through and you get to the bottom of that page, okay, is you get your next Morse code, and that then translates to the word old. And so the first one was the second word was old, so the old. So that's as far as we are on that transcription, but I think it's a good start. Definitely a little creepy. I think the family's a little creepy. Now, I didn't think that when I read it the first time, I didn't think the family was as creepy as when I read through the second time. And maybe because I now know the thing to watch out for and place more importance on, but that's why I'm discussing it with you, so that you, if you want, you can go back and reread this chapter and perhaps make those notes yourself on the things that you think are creepy. Now, I have created a Discord channel. There's nobody on, myself and one other person, but the idea of the Discord channel is that we can then go back and discuss anything further that we think has happened in this chapter that you think are important, okay? Chapters and documentation. So we can have an ongoing conversation about what has already been discussed, not about what is going to be read, because we don't want to give away spoilers for anybody who has not read this yet, but only for the chapters that we have read. Okay. So the next chapter we're going to read is chapter 2, is Memory Lane. That will be next up for the next deep dive. And I believe there's documentation after this chapter. Let's just double check. Yes. So there is another transcription for it, okay, on here. And this has to do with a dog. So anyways, that is another document. And so we've got Memory Lane. It is next up, which is chapter 2, and documentation 2, which is Doc A12 K9. Okay, so that's what's up next for that book. All right, so that was easy, nice and quick with that. So next up, we're going to take a look at This Book Will Bury Me. Okay, so we're going to start with this one. Now, what I wanted to do is just mention that there is just a short set of content warnings. It says grief, loss of a parent, extreme violence, and discussions of weight. So those are the things that do transpire in here. And, obviously they'll come to pass as we're going through. Okay, so let's look at the first chapter, right, which I wrote down on here, prologue, because I sort of felt that this chapter discusses a future occurrence. So it almost feels like a prologue, but it is an introduction into, and it's very short, it's only 2 pages, and it is an introduction into why this story is being told. And this almost feels a bit like autobiographical. It's like the narrator is telling her story about something that happened in the future and why she got to that point in the future. So in the prologue, it says, I'm just going to read the first few lines. If you're reading this, chances are last year you flipped on the news and saw me getting shoved to my knees in the dirt, hands rested behind my back, gun-toting FBI agents swarming like ants around me into that 3-story house. So this kind of sets the tone for what's going to happen. And it says, and again, the narrator is saying in the next paragraph, I've gotten your letters, your pleas, your death threats. Your hunger is legible and familiar. You want what I once wanted, the insatiable longing for answers. So this is, again, sets the tone for what's going to happen a bit in the story. And then as we go through, this just talks about, it's very ambiguous. It talks about getting involved in true crime as online snooper, so to speak. And it mentions about how things get spread online. It just kind of just glances off the surface. And she says, this time to let all the skeletons out of the closet. So she's clearly referring to herself. And then at the very end, she says, my story starts with a body, just not the one you might expect. And I put a note about what it might be, but that kind of leads us into chapter 2. So I'm not going to say anything about that, but it's what I think she's alluding to. The very beginning of chapter 2, she talks about how she received a phone call at 10:45 at night that changes her life. So she is a University of Central Florida undergrad, and she's there, and she, is with a friend of hers at a party. Now, there are like small footnotes throughout these chapters, and the footnotes typically refer to a person or something that she's relating to in here. And in this case, it's the friend Gabby Maldonado. It says, not her real name. I've given Gabby a pseudonym to protect her from association with me. So again, it's like this is autobiographical. It's like those little notations are as if you're reading a true biography, which I thought was interesting about the book. And it was one thing that I liked right off the get-go. She started university 2 years late because she went to a local community college first. So she feels that she's older because she's 24 when she's in university. I don't know that that's that unusual, but she does mention it, and I believe it's something that she feels self-conscious about at 24. And she was lonely, and so she's made some friends, and she was out at a party, and she gets this phone call. What got me here is you learn her name for the first time. And her name is Janeway Sharp. Everybody calls her Jane. Okay? Janeway is because of her father, who loved science fiction and Star Trek. And that's why he wanted to name her Janeway. But the phone call, so I'm going to read this. My mother was hysterical on the other end of the line. Your father, Jane, I think he's had a heart attack. I'm in the car following the ambulance to the hospital. Please, honey, I need you to pray. So this sets off everything because she was very close to her father. So she's got to get to the hospital. Gabby takes her to the hospital, which I think is great that her friend did that. But it doesn't matter. As soon as she gets there, she finds out from her mom. I feel like I've been talking for 100 years. She finds out from her mom he didn't wake up. So he had a heart attack, didn't make it. The later she finds out as she goes through this that he was basically dead at the house. He had a massive heart attack. And there is some discussion about the fact that he was very much overweight. So that kind of comes into it. I think that was part of the third chapter deals with her finding out, the truth. Her mother is basically unable to do anything. Jane pretty much does everything. It all talks about her dad and how they grew up. They didn't have a lot. They didn't have a lot of money. And she was a surprise child. So, but she is an only child. She has no siblings. So now it's just her and her mom, which is very hard. And then in chapter 4, it deals with the fact that she's having a very difficult time with the idea that he's gone and she needs to see him. And her mom doesn't want her to see him like that. But they don't have a lot of money. So, he's going to be cremated. But if if you do a layout where he gets dressed and prepped and everything, then that's all money. But Jane is like, I want to see him. This is like super important to her, is to see her father. I think that in her own mind, it's hard to, because she was at university, she didn't get to see him before he died. So for her, it's almost like he's not dead. She needs to accept that, and she's having a hard time accepting that. So this deals with that. Her mom does say, she says, we can look into visitation, but it'll probably just be you. I don't think I can see him that way again. So her mother's also having a hard time dealing with it, not just Jane. And she's like, it's her way of trying to explain where her head was at, because she doesn't feel that anybody else is going to bother to talk about anything like that in the news reports and so on whatever's going to happen in the future. So it's like she's making sure that we know what's been really important. Now, the other thing that I think is interesting, because she says, the person who shall not be named published in that awful book. And there's an asterisk, and it says, I've been advised by my lawyers to avoid directly naming this author or book. So I thought that was interesting. Again, a little bit of an indication this is almost autobiographical. She's been basically doing nothing. She's sitting around the living room. All she's doing is watching TV. Same with her mother. Her mother is not sleeping in the bed. I sort of get that because her mom has to sleep in the room where her father passed away, which can't be the easiest thing in the world to do. So, but she happens to be watching TV, and it's about a case comes up where the guy had gone out fishing, some older fella, went out on his fishing boat, and he hooked a large trash bag. And when he reeled it in, you know what he found, right? Clearly, there has been somebody is died, and the remains are in a bag that was dumped in the lake. And so he called 911. The police came, and this is key because this is where her fixation, and I think it has to do with her dad, is the idea of needing answers. She needs to know as much as the next person what happened, because like her dad, she doesn't know what happened. It's this desire that is now going to translate over to finding the perpetrators and figuring out how this person died, because it's like she can't explain how her dad died, even though it's very straightforward. He had a massive heart attack. So that's kind of where we end off on chapter 4. It's a pretty emotional 4 chapters because it's dealing with what sets her off, what is the chain of events that puts her on this road to where she's going to end up at the end. And this, I think, is very important. This case that she sees on TV is very important. And going into the next 4 chapters is going to be very important. So, for This Book Will Bury Me, we're going into chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. That is what we're going to read. I think it's interesting because this is going to lead into how she gets mixed up with people online that do this criminal snooping, so to speak. They're crime hackers. That's basically what they are. And they are online and they get involved in trying to figure out these cases. And typically trying to help authorities. So I think that's where we're going to end off here. I think it's going to get quite interesting from there. But it is only the beginning, so this is a pretty short episode. I think our episodes might get a little bit more longer as we go through, but I am going to try to keep them a bit short because I would like to have more discussion in the Discord channel. So again, if you'd like to join the Discord channel, it's linked below, and I would love to discuss what we've done so far. And so just to round off, we did chapter 1 from This Book Will Bury Me, which is The Outsiders. We are moving on to chapter 2, which is Memory Lane, and the documentation that comes right after it. In This Book Will Bury Me, we did chapters 1 through 4, and we are moving on to chapters 5, 6, 7, and 8. So that is it for today. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I don't know. I enjoyed it. It was actually really fun to go back and reread because I'm actually reading them a bit more intense because I am marking them up a little bit more and annotating them just a little bit, which I didn't do when I read them initially. On we who you we used to live here, I did put marks in, but I am clearly bookmarking them a heck of a lot heavier now. So yeah. So, and I am tabbing This Book Will Bury Me because I didn't do it the first time around when I read it. So yeah. So that's it today. Really appreciate you watching, and I would really love it if you could like and subscribe. I am just hammering my way very quickly to 1,000 subscribers, and looks like I'm going to make it there before the end of the year. Fingers crossed. It's moving along pretty quick, but I think by the fall, I think I'll hit that 1,000 subscribers, and I'll stop asking at that point. Well, maybe not. Might ask at the end, just like this video. Anyways, it was really great talking with you again, and we'll see you in the next video.